his grandfather said, the Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse, is called animal soul, not because it is necessarily a brute animal. At times it may be a fox, the most cunning of beasts, and great wisdom is needed to perceive its machinations. At other times it might clothe itself in the garb of an earnest, straightforward, humble tzaddik, possessing fine traits of character. So now we're talking about the Yetzer Hara. So this is interesting. The animal soul. The animal soul manifests itself in each person according to his individual character. One person may suddenly experience a powerful longing to study Chassidus. This is the Yetzer Hara that looks like a big chassid. A person might experience a powerful longing to study Chassidus or to meditate deeply on a Chassidic concept. The truth is, however, that this is nothing more than the Yetzer Hara's counsel and the animal soul's machinations, because why? The person is supposed to be davening and time of davening is running out, or they're supposed to have their minyan. And now this Hasidic form of the Yetzer Hara, or the animal soul, dressed in a kapota or a strimal, is trying to get him to contemplate deep pieces of Chassidus, but this is preventing him from engaging in what he really needs to be doing, which is davening or something else similar. And then I like this conclusion. Take this as a general principle and remember it always. Any matter that is effective towards or actually leads to active avoda and is confronted with opposition of any sort, even the most noble opposition, that opposition is the scheming of the animal soul. And my father concluded, until then, I had not known that there can be a pious animal soul, let alone a Hasidic animal soul. So I think that's really good advice, good insight to remember that the animal soul doesn't always look grob. It doesn't always look like some unfrum, or very overtly evil, or some overtly non-godly animal soul. It could be a very cunning animal soul that can even use words of religion to encourage you to not do something that needs to be done. So I thought that was a good Hayom Yom and worth keeping in mind, just so that we know who we're dealing with when we're dealing with the animal soul. Okay, so now I'm just going to say a blessing on my water. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol bivaro. And I want to make a special thank you to whoever did not turn off their cameras, because it's obviously nicer to look at faces than black screens. So I appreciate, thank you, Linda. Yay, Linda, that I have one face to look at. Oh. So yeah, always appreciated. So we're coming into a story in tonight's Parsha reading, which really is a huge incident in the book of mistakes. The mistake of this week's Parsha stands out as being extraordinary large mistake. The biggest, one of the biggest mistakes of them all. And the mistake is the incident connected with the spies, how the spies went into the land of Israel and looked at the land, and instead of seeing good, they were led by their eyes, and possibly even interesting to compare it to the reading we just did, some kind of animal soul dressed in the garb of who knows what exactly, to persuade the Jewish people that trusting in God was not their best line of action. So let's look at it inside. I'm going to bring the screen up onto the screen, and if you want to follow inside, you can follow inside or follow on the screen. And I'm going to show Rashi's commentary. So Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, send out for yourself men who will scout the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to Bnei Israel. You should send one man from each of his father's tribe. Each one shall be a chief in their midst. Now, there's a whole question about this because it looks like this is Hashem's idea, send out for yourself men. And that's where the name of the Parsha comes, Shlach lecha. So a shaliach is an emissary, like the Rebbe has shluchim. Shlach lecha, send for yourself. Anashim is our men. But really, Hashem didn't have a plan of scouts or spies at all. He had promised them a land flowing with milk and honey. It was the people who demanded from Moshe that Moshe should ask Hashem for spies. And then Hashem said to Moshe, well, I'm not telling you to do it, but if you want to do it, go ahead. But in the end, then Hashem says, if you want to do it, so then send for yourself men. But it wasn't a commandment from Hashem that there should be spies. So, in other words, as Rashi says, I'm not commanding you, but if you wish, you may send, because the people had demanded or asked for it. So Moshe sends them, and they were men of distinction. So kulam anashim roshei b'nei Yisrael. Kulam, all of them, anashim roshei b'nei Yisrael. Roshei means the heads of the tribes. According to the Zohar, they were reincarnations of the brother of Yosef, which is just interesting because Yosef says about his brothers, when they come into the land, he says to his brothers, you are spies. You're spying out the land of Egypt. And then the brothers have to convince him that, in fact, they weren't spies. They're just his brothers. But the Zohar says actually these spies that go spy out the land, they're reincarnation of Joseph's brothers. So that's interesting. And then it tells you all the names of all the people. And from the tribe of Ephraim, we have Hoshea, the son of Nun. And we know that Hashem gives him a present, and his name changes and he becomes Yehoshua. Yehoshua gets an extra yud there, which gives him a lot of protection. And we know that there's also Kalev from the tribe of Yehuda. Kalev, I read in the Zohar, is also a reincarnation. And I think I'm going to start taking my Binko Gilboa. What's it called? Binko Gilboa. How is that? Because it's a memory aid. Ginkgo Bilboa, because I've forgotten now who Kalev is a reincarnation of. Oh, he's a reincarnation of Eliezer, the son, the servant of Abraham, which is really interesting because Abraham's servant Eliezer wasn't Jewish, but through his service, he kind of becomes blessed. And it says Kalev is a reincarnation of that soul of Abraham's servant Eliezer. So even before I'm taking my ginkgo, I'm glad I remembered that. And then what happens is that they go and they see the land. And now that Moshe is actually sending them, he says to them, go and see what kind of land it is and the people who inhabit it. Are they strong or are they weak? Are they few or are they many? Go see what kind of way that they're living. And it's interesting that Rashi says, and he gave them a sign. If they live in open cities, it's a sign that they're secure, that they don't need to wall off their cities. If they live in very heavily fortified cities, it's actually a sign, in fact, that they are insecure, which is interesting that they're insecure and they need to put up these big walls. So it is a psychotherapist, I'm sure there's a lot of things you can think about that if you're insecure, you put up all the walls and the barriers, and when you're secure, you don't need all the walls and the barriers. And what of the land they inhabit? Is it good or bad? Are they residing in camps or in fortresses? Again, this idea, are they exposed? And then what is the soil like? Are there trees? Basically, he wants them to get a comprehensive report on everything that they see. So, okay. So they asked for they asked for spies and they're getting spies. So they went up and explored the land from the desert of Zin until Rohav at the entrance of Hama. Show Rashi's commentary. And they went up the south and they came to Hebron. And they came to Hebron. Now it's very interesting here that all of the Meraglim, all of the spies, they came via Hebron, but Kalev, they went up south and just Kalev, went to Hebron. And why is Hebron important? Because that's the burial place. We know, I don't know, Linda, if you went there on your trip to Israel.
Oh, I did. I had a great tour. The patriarchs and very close by was Rachel's tomb in Bethlehem.
Right. So who's
it was
in
amazing.
Hebron? Do you remember all the people in Hebron who buried there?
I remember, I know Leah and Avram and Yaakov, right?
Yes.
Who else? I forget.
It starts with Adam. I think Adam Harishon is supposed to be buried there, and then it's Abraham and Sarah.
Sarah, right?
Abraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Yaakov. Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah, and not Rachel. But, no,
she died in childbirth on her way there.
Right, on the road in Bethlehem. Actually, I'm telling you, Adam Harishon is buried there, but I'm actually not sure if that's in fact true, because Abraham bought the land, and we know he bought it so he could bury Sarah. But in any case, we have Abraham, Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka, Yaakov, Leah, a lot of, heavy hitters. So Yaakov, it says, Rashi tells us that Kalev went there to daven in Hebron, to daven at the graves of his patriarchs and the matriarchs. And look what Rashi says, that he should not be enticed by his colleagues to be part of their council. So Kalev already knew that maybe the spies don't have the complete right outlook and how they're going to interpret events. Okay. So they came to the valley of Eshcol and they cut a branch with a cluster of grapes. Now look at this. Moshe wants to know, is the land abundant? Is it, what kind of fruit do they have? And it says here, they carried a cluster of grapes on a pole between two people. They carried a cluster of grapes. So what does that tell us about the grapes? Somebody who's not muted?
Large.
Yeah, extremely large, right? It took two people with kind of big pieces of wood on their shoulders to carry these grapes on their shoulders. So that's telling you that it's really, the fruit is very large and abundant. And then they come back from scouting the land at the end of 40 days. And they were there all through. So we know that they were there most of the month of Tammuz. Now, Tammuz is a month that is connected to the chush of seeing. How do we see things? What is our perspective? And we know that the tribe connected with Tammuz is Reuven, which means Reu ben, see that now I have a son. And there's a beautiful list of all the things in the next few Parshiot when we're going through the month of Tammuz about how many times we're going to see the word, the concept of seeing, that we need to see correctly with the right perspective. So what happens? So they came to Moshe and they brought back the report and they show to the Bnei Israel the fruits of the land. And they have these big fruits. And it's really amazing when we're living in a time of such media manipulation and how words create realities, and the wrong words said by the wrong people at the wrong time. And then you have tremendous amount of swaying, huge amounts of people kind of being swayed in the wrong direction. So what did they say to Moshe? V'yisapru lo, v'yomru ba'u el ha'aretz asher shalachtanu. We came to the land which you sent us to. V'gam zavat chalav udvash. This is what we've been promised. It is a land flowing with chalav udvash, milk and honey. Who? It is a land flowing with milk and honey. Who? V'zeh priya, and these are our fruits. So they're not saying something that's not true. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, and look at these incredible fruits that we brought back. So Rashi says that if you want a lie to take hold, you need to mix into your lie a little bit of truth. So yes, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. This is true. And here are these fruits. Now, we would like to think they brought like a huge pomegranate with them, I think, and a huge fig. We would like to think that they were showing the fruits to say, look how bountiful the land is. But really, they had an agenda, and the agenda was to say, look, the fruits are kind of mutant fruits. They're not normal. They're giant size. There's something wrong with them. And then they said here, however, the people who inhabit the land are mighty, and the cities are extremely huge and fortified. And there we saw even the offspring of the giants. And then look at this. This sentence really, like, it's like looking at the media today. And if Linda was here when all this was happening, Linda would say, excuse me, but that's not true. Because what happens next is it says, Amalek, look at verse 29. It says, Amalek Yoshev be'eretz hanegev. And the Amalekites dwell in the south land. And then they say the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites and the Canaanites. But the Amalekites doesn't tell it to you on your screen, but on my screen, it actually tells me that, in fact, the Amalek people were not even there. They were not even there, and they only mentioned it to scare everybody, because they only mentioned it to scare. Unlike the other nations mentioned by the spies, Amalek was not among the nations whose land the Israelites even intended to conquer. Nevertheless, the spies mention Amalek in order to frighten the people. So there's political manipulation right there, that they already had their war with Amalek. They have a feeling about Amalek. We still have a feeling about Amalek. We still have a commandment that wherever we see the descendants of Amalek, if we can identify them correctly, we need to eradicate them. Amalek is that power in the world that wants to eradicate everything that is Jewish, that Judaism stands for. And we know that the gematria of Amalek is the same as the word safek, which is to doubt. So the power of Amalek comes and makes us doubt the value of all our actions. But it's also this nation that wants to exterminate us. And the descendant of Amalek that we're most familiar with is Haman in the story of Purim. So they use this as like a part of their propaganda, and they say that, and even the Amaleks are over there, but really that's irrelevant, but they just want to build up their point. And now look what happens. Kalev tries to silence the people, and he says, come on, guys, V'yomer, Allah na'aleh, v'yarshnu ota, ki yachol nuchala. He says, come on, we can do this. It's so painful and dramatic that Kalev says, everybody, this Hashem promised us we can do this. He's going to help us. It's going to be okay. We can take possession of this land and we can overcome it. Now, I'm not sure exactly where it says it, in which Rashi, but it's really interesting that when he says we can overcome this people, one of the reasons why he says we can overcome them is that Caleb knows that every nation has a malach that's guards over it and has their own version of tzaddikim. And he knows, I'm just looking if I can find the place. He knows that Eov was a great protection for these nations that were occupying Eretz Israel. And he knows that Eov has passed away. Now, who's Eov? Eov is Job. And Job is the person that we've read that the suffering of Job. Job is the prophet who loses so much and is suffering so much, but he's still a righteous person, but was one of the advisors of Paro. Remember, Paro had three advisors. He had Bilam, he had Yisro, and he had Eov. And Bilam was the evil, horrible one. Yisro didn't like what was going on and the way things were going, taking care of the Jewish problem. So Yisro, who becomes Moshe's father-in-law, he leaves and renounces then and maybe before then a lot of his idol worshipping ways. And the last one of the third one was Eov. And he doesn't object to the evil plans. Maybe that's why all the suffering is vested upon him. But I'm going to try and find it in the Rashi. I'm just looking because it's really beautiful that, where is it that it says that Eov, that they don't have Eov anymore, and so they've lost their protection, and therefore we'll be able to defeat them. But I can't find it here, so I guess you just have to take my, it's a little bit later. It's a little bit later when Caleb says, do not rebel against Hashem. You don't have to fear the people of the land. They are like our bread. We'll even be able to consume them like bread. And then he says, their protection has departed from them. Hashem is with us. Do not fear them. And Rashi says, what does it mean their protection has left them? So the one who used to, their shield and their strength, the decent one among them, the decent ones among them have died, and specifically Eov, who protected them through his merit. So the decent men amongst the Canaanites are no longer there. This is a huge thing. Such a deep point that when a tzaddik dies, the whole area in which he lives no longer has the protection of his aura. So when Avram Avinu left where he left, when Avram left, a certain holy aura of the place left with Abraham, and it was no longer the same place. When a tzaddik leaves a place. So even in the non-Jewish world, this man Eov, he did get punished terribly, but he was a God-fearing person, and he was no longer alive, so his merit was no longer present to protect the people. And Caleb understood this, or he knew it, and he says, we don't have to be afraid of these people. So he says, we can surely go up and take possession of it. We can overcome. And it's really interesting that nobody wants to hear what he has to say, because he's going against the mainstream narrative of the other tribes. Of the 12 tribes, and the 12 spies, only 2 were pro going into Israel and trusting God, and 10 were against, and they get very vicious. They want to stone Caleb, and they really want to silence him. It says he silenced them all, so that, he wanted them to be silent, and then everybody is really angry with Moshe, and they want to go back to Eretz Israel, to Egypt. And Caleb says, you're complaining about Moshe, but he did a lot of great things with us. He split the sea for us. He brought us manna. He helped us. He did all kinds of things. Come on, we can surely go up to If Hashem wanted to go even to Shemayim, he says, you know, it says in Rashi, if he tells us make ladders and go up to Shemayim, even that we would be able to do if we had faith and we have trust. And it doesn't go down so well. The men, these other 10 tribes who went up with him said, we are unable to go up against the people. They are stronger than we are. And Rashi even says, when it says, Amru lo nucha la'alot im ha'am ki chazak hu mimenu, Rashi even says that they're almost saying that they're stronger than Hashem. They're stronger than Hashem. It's like, just like the sin of the golden calf was not having trust and faith in Moshe Rabbeinu, and not having trust that they could just wait for Moshe to come down and they didn't need anything else other than Hashem. In the same way, now they're saying this people, these people in Eretz Israel, and it's not just the people, it's the natural, logical reality of small people goes against big, strong people. We can't do it. And then you could say, but what about David and Goliath? What about the Maccabees? What about the existence of the Jewish people? We always an irrational survival, irrational survivors. We don't survive because of natural law. We survive because of irrational law. But the men who were with him said, we're unable to go up against the people, for they are stronger. Ki chazak hu mimenu. Rashi says, could also be interpreted that they are stronger than he, than Hashem. So that's an avodah zarah. So it says that after the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, Hashem wanted to make them wander in the desert for 40 years. He was so insulted by what they did with worshiping that idol, but he decided, you know what? I'm not going to punish them with 40 years of wandering in the desert. They don't deserve such a big punishment. Moshe advocated for them and he forgave them. But now you're adding insult to injury a year later, after that horrible debacle with the Chet HaEgel, the golden calf, you're doing this again. You're not trusting me. You're thinking that these people are stronger than me. Forget about it. I'm ready to be finished with you. And then it says, they spread an evil report about the land which they had scouted, telling the Bnei Israel. What did they tell them? The land we passed through to explore is a land that consumes its inhabitants. And all the people we saw in it are men of great stature, like big and strong. So again, this is a lot of misconstruing and a lot of how do you see things. So apparently when they came into the land, the people in the land were busy with a lot of funerals. And Hashem's, I don't know why there was this plan, but in order to distract the people from the spies coming in, Hashem made it that a lot of people in Canaan at that time died, and there were a lot of funerals, so the people should be distracted by the funerals and not notice the spies. But what happened is the spies noticed a lot of the funerals and thought, wow, people are dying here all the time. And then they felt like for them that was a bad sign. So, and now for the cherry on the top of this horrible bad story. And then it says, V'sham ri'inu, and there we saw et hanephilim, these kind of giants, b'nei anak, these descendants of giants, the sons of Anak. Anak was, I think, a malach that came down to earth, some mystical thing how these giants came about. I'm not going to focus on that so much. Min hanephilim, v'nehi ba'anenu kachagavim v'kein hayinu ba'enehem. Now this is the worst line probably in all of Chumash, or at least this whole book of Chumash. It says we seemed like, in our eyes, we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we were in their eyes, like grasshoppers. Now, this is a people who've been carried out of Egypt on the wings of angels, on Hashem taking them out of Egypt, Hashem feeding them man, Hashem leading them through the desert with a fire in front, lighting their way, and a cloud above them, protecting them. These are God's chosen people, a nation chosen to be a nation of priests. And they say about themselves, in our eyes, we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we were in their eyes. And Rashi says that they overheard them telling each other, they're ants in the vineyard who look like people. So it's a very psychologically juicy little piece of information here. So v'nahi ba'enenu, it was to our eyes, we saw ourselves kechagavim, like grasshoppers. V'chein hayinu ba'enehim. First of all, they don't know really how they were perceived, but they thought of themselves as grasshoppers. This is the bottom of the pit when Hashem sees that they've lost all trust in him and in themselves, in who they're meant to be and in what they were created to be. Now just remember that this is like the climax of the story. And when they say this, the entire community raise their voices and people start crying and weeping. Oh, so terrible. We were like grasshoppers. We are grasshoppers. We can't go to Eretz Israel. We can't do it. Oh, boo, boo, boo. So this day is the 9th day of Av, Tisha B'Av. This is the day Hashem says you're crying for nothing. You're not listening to Kalev. You're not listening to the fact that I'm going to help you. You're not listening to the fact that everything about your existence is higher than nature. Suddenly you're a grasshopper? You my people, I promised you that you would defeat them. You have nothing to worry about. They cry, and it says actually above that it says the spies went amongst the people when they weren't in front of Kalev and Moshe and Yehoshua and started insinuating all their disgusting ideas and talking about it in amongst the people, so that finally the people are crying and shouting and saying that they can't go in. And look how bad it gets. And we spoke about this in last week's Parsha as well. The distortion. Suddenly Egypt was a wonderful place, right? The battered wife who runs away, and then she's like thinking that maybe she should go back to her husband who's terrible to her because she's in this mentality of I don't deserve any better. What happens? All the Bnei Israel complaining against Moshe and Aaron and saying, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, that would have been better. Better that we should die in this desert, but we can't possibly trust God and trust Kalev, who was the only one who went to daven at the kever of the forefathers. And if we trusted Yehoshua, who Moshe gave him an extra yud in his name to help him be stronger, we can't listen to those people. We have to listen to these propagandists who are making a louder noise. And so they start crying, and they even say, let's make a leader and go back to Egypt. I mean, this is like very low level. And Rashi says they're even saying, let's create an idol and just take a whole different path, make an idol, just leave this whole Hashem path. And it says Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces in front of the whole of Israel, and Yehoshua, Ben Nun, and Kalev, they tore their clothes, and it's really upsetting and really bad. And Hashem really is finished with them, and he's not happy. And it's we'll stop looking inside the text. So it's a very sad story and very dramatic. And I want to read you Rabbi Jonathan Sacks's take on it from a psychological point of view, because it's so, I think, so interesting how he takes all the things that the spies do and he puts it in the context, a psychological context. So I hope I can do Jonathan Sacks justice, Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory justice in doing this, but I'll do my best. So he says that he had the opportunity to meet Aaron T. Beck, who is the founder of cognitive behavioral therapy. And he discovered, he developed his therapeutic approach through research he did at the University of Pennsylvania. And he said he was working with depressed people, particularly depressive people, rescuing them from depression. He was working, and he began to see a pattern amongst the people he was working with. And the pattern that he saw was the way in which they interpreted events in their lives. That the way of interpreting events becomes the dominant factor that's going to contribute to them being depressed or not. The way they interpreted events was done in such a negative way that it was damaging to their self-respect, and it was fatalistic. It was as if they thought themselves into a condition that one of Beck's most brilliant disciples, Martin Seligman, was later to call learned helplessness. Essentially, they kept telling themselves, I am a failure, nothing I try will ever succeed, I am useless, things will never change. And he said that they thought these thoughts, without even thinking about it, they thought these thoughts without thinking about it. What I mean to say is they thought these thoughts in an automatic way. Mm. And even once they became conscious of these thoughts and realized that they weren't always justified, then they could learn more realistic thought patterns and start to cure themselves. And Rabbi Sacks brings it, and he said, this is the story of the spies. So they come back with a demoralizing report, and even though the land's flowing with milk and honey, and even though Kalev says that it can be done, they buy into this negative headspace that we are grasshoppers. And so what happened? A terrible thing happened. The people lost heart, and they believed in what these other spies were saying. And they even are so hopeless that they want to go back to Egypt, and Hashem becomes very angry, and Moshe pleads for their mercy. And as a result of their buying into the propaganda, the whole generation and all those 10 spies have to stay wandering for 40 years in the desert, and none of them can enter into the land. The woman, by the way, again, the women don't buy into it, and the women are ready and have faith, and so they don't have to die out. A lot of them did enter into the land, but the men, all the men who bought into this narrative, which was basically all the men except Yoshua and Kalev, they all, every Tisha B'Av, they would lie down in their own graves and they would die. When they reached the age of 60, the curse was that they wouldn't enter the land of Israel, but not that they would die young. So they had to keep wandering so that they could live up to 60 and then die a natural death. But the woman didn't have to do that, and many of the women could enter. essential to understand this passage is the fact that the report was a fabrication. It was unfounded. Actually, the people were not, it says later, Yehoshua enters into the land and sends spies, which he was allowed to do, and there's a much different result. And somebody tells Yehoshua, I know that the Lord, someone from Canaan, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and the dread of you, the fear of you, Bnei Israel, is fallen on us. And all the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before you, people of Hashem. And as soon as we heard you were coming, our hearts melted, and there was no courage left in any of us because of you. That's how it's supposed to be when Jews stand strong and tall and have trust in Hashem and believe in what he says. Then the enemies melt. But when we melt in front of the enemies and we have no self-respect, no good comes of it. Right, Linda? No good.
Right.
So how could they make such a profound mistake? So this is the part that I wanted to share with you. For this, we turn to cognitive behavioral therapy and some of the types of distorted thinking identified by Beck's student, David Burns. And there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points. And each one is really good. All or nothing thinking, number 1. Either everything is black or white, good or bad, easy or impossible. So when they looked and they saw fortified cities and big people, they didn't think we'll have to be strategic, we'll need courage, we'll need skill, but with God's help, we'll prevail. No, it was just, it can't be done. All or nothing thinking. Number 2, negative filtering. We discount the positives as being insignificant and only focus on the negatives. So the land is good, look at its fruit, but, and that word but in Hebrew is ephes. Such an interesting word. Ephes means but it also means zero. Ephes, nothing. And so, yes, the land is flowing with milk and honey and the fruit is huge, but, and in that but, they filter out the land flowing with milk and honey and just focus on the negative. Third thing, catastrophizing, expecting disaster to strike no matter what. That is what the people did when they said, why is Hashem bringing us to the land so that we should die over there by the swords? Our wives and our children will be taken as prisoners. Catastrophizing. Hashem said everything will be fine. Why are you creating these negative scenarios? Mind reading. We assume we know what other people are thinking. When they said we seemed like grasshoppers in their eyes, they don't know. They didn't know what was, that was their projection. Thinking that everybody's looking at me. Everybody. I have a client who I do yoga therapy with, and she said to me, I want to do my exercises, but I don't want to do them on the porch because I think if I'm doing them on the porch, my neighbor won't like it. I said, what? She said, my neighbor won't like it. I said to her, why do you care what your neighbor thinks? It's your porch. If you want to go outside on your porch and exercise, why does it bother you what your neighbor's thinking? It's your porch. So she's thinking, and I said, and maybe he'd be very happy to see you stretching and exercising on your porch. How do you know that he will think badly of you? So that's mind reading in a negative way. The last one is inability to disconfirm. You reject any evidence or argument that might contradict your negative thinking. And the spies heard Caleb saying, we can do it, Hashem will help us. They lost Eov, he died, they don't have this merit anymore. Hashem will help. No, inability to disconfirm. The 6-point emotional reasoning, letting your feelings rather than careful deliberation dictate your thinking. A key example is the interpretation spies placed on the fact that the cities were fortified and very large with big walls. They could have thought they're very insecure that they have to have such big walls. They don't need to, their reasoning was emotionally based. And the last thing is blame. We accuse someone else of being responsible for our predicament instead of accepting responsibility ourselves. And what happens? They're fearful. They have all these negative projections. They think of themselves as grasshoppers, and then they start grumbling. And who do they want to attack? Moshe and Aaron. It's your fault. You should have left us in Egypt. People who blame others have already started down the road of learned helplessness. They see themselves as powerless to change. They're passive victims of forces beyond their control. And this leads to depression and despair, very dangerous conditions. And the antidote to that is to look and to see with clarity of vision. See what's really there. See what supports you really have. See that Hashem has helped you all the time before. See that you have what it takes to get what you need. So at the end of this week's Parsha, oh, that's a good question. At the end of this week's Parsha, we have the thing of tzitzis, that you'll see the tzitzis and you'll remember the your mitzvahs, and you need to see with hope and faith. I'll answer your question in a second. I'll just finish here that Roosevelt's famous words in his first inaugural address, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. Well, we can certainly apply that to our own world that we've just seen, where we've had like a huge issue of fear. The world has been gripped with fear. Where's the faith? Okay, so the tzitzis is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy saying, don't be afraid, Hashem is with you. Do not give way to your emotions because you are royalty. You are children of the king. What's Jonathan Sacks' life-changing idea? Never let negative emotions distort your perceptions. You are not a grasshopper. Those who oppose you are not giants. See the world as it is, not as you are afraid it might be. Let faith banish fear. So now Ita asked a very good question, and her question was, why did they not want to go into the land? So number one, we can say that they were, even though they were very righteous people, they lost their faith and their trust, and they were of small mind and not of big mind. And we can be critical of them too, and say that in a way they were evil people, or they did a very evil thing and they talked the people out of the land of Israel very bad, and look at them in a very negative light. The Lubavitcher Rebbe gives an explanation that turns everything around on its head and says that while they were in the desert, they were living a very holy life. And their very holy life was, Etta, you still there? Because I'm answering your question. Yeah. And their very holy life while they were in the desert was they were fed by manna. They weren't people working the fields. It's like if you think about being in yeshiva compared to going out to work. They got all their food from heaven. Their clothes were dry cleaned. They didn't have to deal with the physicality of life. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe said that they liked living in the spiritual reality of the desert, of the Midbar. And they didn't really feel that the people would handle going into Eretz Israel and living a life where they would have to get their hands dirty, so to speak, with agriculture, with gashmiut, with physicality. and that they felt that they would lose this connection to Hashem taking care of them and keeping them in this bubble of, almost like an infantile bubble that Hashem's taking care of all their needs, and they're eating man, they're not working, maybe they're davening and praying all day. I'm not sure what they were doing, but they were really in Hashem's protection and bubble, and that they liked that, and they didn't want to lose that by going into the land and having to start plowing and tilling and sowing and reaping and working and losing that sort of spiritual existence. So that is another explanation of why they might have saw fit to present such a negative picture. But it's a good topic for homework, for everybody to really try and read up or look online why they bought into this negative, fearful narrative. I think my answer from my study that I've done so far was that they bought into the fear, like people are doing left, right, and center. They bought into the fear. And they didn't mean to be bad. They just lost their faith and bought into the fear. The way people have done around Corona, the way people are ready to have done crazy things because they're full of fear. And I think that they somehow were not fortified in their faith, and they bought into fear. And that fear is the opposite of faith. And in a way, it becomes like an idol worship. You're worshiping the fear instead of having your trust and your faith in Hashem. So that's all from me. I'm opening to questions, comments, discussions. You can unmute yourself if you've been muted until now. I'd love to hear your comments or your questions. You can type them to me if you don't want to say them out loud. Or I can just say it was swell and wish you good night. But
you got it, Karina.
It was very good. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And
Racha, thank you. This is beautiful.
Racha,
yes,
I have a question. It's
Sure.
very small.
Sure, I'm ready to.
So I was listening to a class by your friend Diane today, and it's just a technical question. Usually my questions are technical. She said that they weren't called Meraglim until next week's Parsha. That this week, because I don't know inside what they are called. I just was wondering if you have any idea off the top of your head.
Well,
If you've ever heard this, because I never heard that they weren't called Meraglim until next week.
They were called men. I think they were called men. They were called Anashim, Alu, Imor. Anashim, men. I don't think, they were called Anashim.
I'm sure there's some significance to it. And Diane was focusing, she just read through the Sukkim. She just mentioned that as a matter of fact type of thing.
V'yiraber Hashem el Moshe lemor, shlach lecha anashim. Send for you men. Send for you men.
I think maybe because they hadn't done the Avera yet of who they were until they spoke Lashon Hara. So maybe they were just called men, and then that's my 2 cents.
Right. Meraglim isn't a negative word necessarily. Meraglim is, regal is to,
Right.
It's like scouts. They were scouting out the land. I don't know if that's really a derogatory term, but it is an interesting comment, and I don't know enough to comment on why.
Right.
I know that there's different words for men. There's Adam, Enosh, Anashim. Each one has a different sort of ish. Each one has a different meaning. And
exactly.
Some are more elevated ways of calling people and some are less. But I don't feel comfortable to say. I know there's Adam, Enosh, Ish, and
right.
Yeah, Gever. So I'm not sure.
Right. I just figured I would ask you because I couldn't ask Diane because I had to.
She probably would be a better person to answer than me. Because she knows.
Right, I know. I had to go to sleep and get ready for work. And also, I'm just saying this because I don't know who you're the one who you give the Torah therapy, the yoga therapy too, who said she was uncomfortable on her porch.
Right.
But-
She wasn't uncomfortable because she said she's not sneers or something.
Oh, okay. So that's what I was thinking.
She said, I'm uncomfortable because he might not like it. Not because she would be uncomfortable. She said, because she's perfectly sneers. She said, I wouldn't want to do it because he might not like it. And she's talking about her own private porch in her own private home.
Right. I wonder, because also it's like like yoga poses aren't also so sneistic, and even though we don't think it's not sneistic, we're ladies.
No, she's
We
an
don't
older
know.
lady.
Like men, Hasidic men in Muncie don't like it when you pass them something to their hand, but you don't think it's a big deal because you're like, well,
So
I'm not touching your hand.
that is possibly true, but she's an older person and she's not going to be bending down and doing that much on sneers.
Oh, okay.
She's going to be moving her arms up and down. So the point was that she was considering his feelings more than her feelings.
Her feelings and her needs. And I liked the cognitive, those 10 things that you listed. I got them from a group once, those 10 things that you had,
Yes.
gone over. They're very, very important, good things to know about because
Yeah.
anyway, so thank you.
All right.
Nothing deep,
All right. Anyone else have a comment? Linda, anything you want to say?
No, it was very meaningful to me. The whole, the connection to psychology. I love Seligman and, rationally motor behavior therapy. I mean, I did a master's in it.
Right.
So to see it in Torah is like, wow, that's what,
and this is consequence of that because we stayed in the desert for 40 years. It was not a simple thing.
no, not at all.
Consequence of it.
I guess it was easy to fall into negative thinking.
Yeah, that's the whole point. And for us, for ourselves, not to do that because I didn't say it really before, but if we buy into the negative thinking, where do we land up wandering around for 40 years instead of getting to our promised land? I guess that's the important, point to make at the end is like when we buy into the, I'm just a grasshopper, I'll never overcome, I'll never be victorious, I'll never overcome the enemy, I can't enter into the land. We have all our own meanings of what that means for us in our lives, and to be encouraged by their mistake not to do that in our lives.
Right, exactly.
Okay, have a good night, everyone. Thank you for listening. All right, all the best. Laila Tov.
Bye-bye, Laila Tov.